much for joining me. I'm Anna from Craft Me a Card, and I'm crafting for the crafter, and that is you. So for today, as you can see here, I will be showing you how I worked on these wonderful young ladies that are vintage looking. And these are for cards, for an order of cards. From a friend. She gave me these stickers. They're like vintage stickers, and she said, I need 5 cards for 5 of my friends for Valentine's. And I have these stickers, and I just, hope you get inspired with them. And I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, that's like taking a child to Disneyland and saying, here you go, I hope you have fun. So thank you so very much, Gabby, for trusting me and giving me these fun stickers to play with. Since they work in a school, I thought it would be fun to show them how it is that I made these cards for them and share it with you guys and hope to inspire you. Looking through these stickers, I went ahead and with some good old Post-its, I went ahead and I marked which ones were the ones that I was going to work with. Based on the colors of these stickers, I went ahead through my stash and I just pulled a bunch of different cardstock that I felt would work with these stickers. Since I have different images and it will all be going to girls that work in the same place, I didn't want each one to be too different. Therefore, my plan is to make them all similar but different. Okay, so the first card I decided to work with was this image here of what I named her the Green Girl. And she has a beautiful dress which has that vintagey olive green to it. So I decided to pick 3 different cardstocks to go with this card. And when working with something that is vintagey, you want to use at least 3 colors, I would say. And this is because anything vintage has a lot of layers to it and different textures. So keep that in mind when looking for that vintagey look. Okay, so to bring some balance to the card, I decided to put the darker color as my base and then use this same color as a frame for my image. So just by placing the sticker on top of the darker cardstock, I go ahead and I cut it out. I noticed that the sticker had a little stickery look to it, which was kind of like a little glare, a little shine to it, which I didn't really like. It was too plasticky for me. So I decided to go ahead and add some glue over top so that it could dull it a little bit. It could make it a little bit matte. And keeping in mind that I want all these cards to be similar, I decided to do the same thing with other of those images. And because they need to dry, I decided to do that ahead of time. On other images, I decided to add this Crackle finish to them. I found this on clearance actually, and I couldn't pass it up. I've always wanted to try this Crackle kind of medium. So here I'm trying out for the first time, and I really love the results. You'll see when the time comes to show how it dried. So just by adding some of this medium on top of each of the stickers, I just with the paintbrush, with the regular little paintbrush, you want to use a cheap one. You don't want to go expensive on this. You just go ahead and you smear this Crackle all over. And again, everything that I use will be listed down on the description box. Once my images are nice and dry, I go ahead and I distress the edges, and just by grabbing a crafter's knife, you go all around scraping it, and that gives it a beautiful vintagey look. And again, we're looking for texture. It gives it a different texture. To start forming the card, I go ahead and I grab my card base, which is a 6.5 by 5 inch card base, and I just go ahead and I crease it. As with every card I make, I go ahead and I put the base on top of my first layer, the cardstock I will be using, and with a crafter's knife, I go around it, and that gives me a beautifully covered first layer. Then I go in with my crafter's knife again, and I cut out the inside piece, and this is the piece that will not be seen and can be repurposed, and it takes off weight from the card. Especially these cards, because they're going to be landscapes, so you don't want that weight to just flatten the card when they place it to be displayed. My term for that, when a card does that, I use the term of ice skater card. I always compare it to somebody that doesn't know how to ice skate, how they just bloop, open up and fall. Alrighty, so next I just grab my liquid glue and I place the glue on top of my card base, and then I bring in the card stock and place my first layer on the card. Then I bring in this beautiful olive green, and I go ahead and I cut this 3/16 of an inch smaller on each side. And I'm demonstrating here for you what 3/16 is. And what this allows is just to give it a nice thin border around the card. So after I have done this with the green layer, I go ahead and I bring my pattern paper and I cut this one 1/4 of an inch smaller than my green pattern paper. And you can see here the look that I'm going for. Okay, so next I pull out my corner chomper and I go ahead and I cut the corners of each of these layers. Then with the crafter's knife, I just go ahead and I distress the edges of both of these layers just to be the same as the first piece, which is the one where our sticker is placed on. And with good old liquid glue, I go ahead and I place this glue on the back of the cardstock and I start forming my card. I start putting it together. Same goes with my top layer, the one with the glittery accents. I just place it on top. Then I bring in this beautiful trim that I bought at Hobby Lobby and I just place some liquid glue across the trim and I place it across the card, which is perfect because it has these hearts and it looks very vintagey. But I wanted something to fill in that little gap that it has on top, and then I bring in this other trim and just again by adding some liquid glue I place it on top and I leave it to dry. Okay, so I continue on with the red card. This one I called the Red Girl because most of the color is going to be red. And I do the same process as I did with the Green Girl. For my middle layer for this card, I decided to bring in something a little bit with more white just to balance out the white of the trim. And once I glue the trim on, I just leave it to dry. Since it is liquid glue, it just does take a little bit to dry. So I just set it aside and I start working on the next card. For these two next cards, I worked them the same because they had the same color palette. So let me show you what differences you could find here. I named this next one the Booty Girl. And I named her that because Gabby chose a sentiment that was actually quite cute and I really liked it. Actually says inside, I love you with all my butt. I would say my heart, but my butt is bigger. So I thought that sentiment was very appropriate for girlfriends, you know, for friends that really get along great, that have a great sense of humor. So for this card, I decided to not use the heart trim, but use a darker trim. And this is just to bounce the card out. I felt that the white of the trim was killing some of that vibrance that the back of the cardstock had. So just by using a darker color, it brought out the darkness of the card and the colors. It just made them pop a little more. Since I had already placed my cardstock on, thinking that I was going to use the trim, the white trim, just using a crafter's knife, I was able to pick up that cardstock and just sneak in that seam binding right under that first layer.
You sneaky girl, you.
And to reinforce the seam binding with this fine tip bottle with glue, I went ahead and I snuck some glue in there. Since for these two cards I didn't have the fanciness of that trim, I decided to make a bow, make a vintage looking bow. And by using some seam binding ribbon, I went ahead and I used the contraption I made. I'll put the link on the upper right hand side corner of this video so you can see how it is that this contraption works, and you could make it at home. But this is a fancy one that I did. I found these metal chopsticks at the store and I bought them and they work perfect for this instead of the wooden skewers. It's nice to add a little nice center to these bows, so I went ahead and I found these buttons that I thought would be perfect. So I picked this one that has a little bit of red just to bring out a little bit of that red that she has on her hat. These are actually brads, and I just went ahead and I opened it up and I just wrapped it around the center of that bow. And with a little bit of fire, I went ahead and I burned the edges just to avoid any fraying. I'm bringing in a new card base. I decided to work on the fairy card, and this card has lighter colors. It has that pink that looks so pretty when it comes to fairies. So here I decided to use this brown vintage background paper. Following the same steps of distressing the cardstock and cutting out the inside of the card, I glued the first layer on. This is the fairy sticker. And I want you to see how awesome that crackle effect came out. So I just go ahead and I grab it and I paste it on top of the inside piece that I cut from the first layer. That'll give the card a nice balance. Having the same cardstock as my first layer and then having it also at the top with the image, with the fairy image. Once I have my layers cut out and distressed, I go ahead and put the card together. I'm going to be using a different trim for this card. I thought that something that would look like drops would look perfect for it. And this is another trim that I bought at Hobby Lobby. And here you see me using Jewel Lit glue. Jewel Lit glue is a glue that is good for, as it says, jewels. So anything that is not porous, not like paper, this glue is good for it, and this will hold it nice and tight. So while this glue dries, I go to my Cricut and I cut out the sentiment. I decided to use G is for girlfriends. I thought it was very appropriate because they work at a school, and you know how teachers use A is for apple, D is for dog. So I decided to use G is for girlfriends. So I just take each individual card and I go ahead and I glue down the sentiment G is for girlfriends on each one of these cards. Now to add the actual image, I decided to add some little flourishes to the sides of each one of these. And this is again to give it different texture, different layers. And for each one of these cards, I just look for different flourishes. I'd cut different sizes, different forms, and I go ahead and I add it behind each one of the images. After I decide how these little flourishes are going to be placed, I go ahead and I put some foam adhesive on the back of the images, and this is to give it more volume, make it stand up above the card. And even though these adhesives do have sticker on them, I like to actually use liquid glue on top of it just to secure it and make it a little more sturdy and long-lasting. Sentiments that I use white cardstock, I decided to distress them a bit using antique linen, and this is Distress Ink by Tim Holtz. Using an ink blending tool, I just go over the words and that distresses them. Due to the volume of the teardrop trim for the fairy card, I did need to double up the foam adhesive to give it that volume. I decided to add some like dewdrops to this fairy card. And also, I think it goes perfect for anything fairy. So just again, by applying some of that Jewel Lit glue, I stick these little gems down that look like water drops. And this dries absolutely clear. You can't even tell that the glue is there. I made sure each card had something a little special. For this red one, I decided to add some red gems on the Flourish, and that just enhances that part of the card a little bit more and makes it stand out. As a final finish to all these cards, I decided to transfer some of that Crackle finish to one of these precision tip bottles and add this finish to the words, to all the words. So just by adding some of this liquid on top of the letters, I get that crackle effect on each one of these cards.
Which I think is mighty pretty, it really is.
And here they are, all nice and dry. You can see the effect. You can see each one of them, all the details that they have. I think they came out very pretty, and I hope these girls really enjoy them and they really like them. And once again, thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so and show your support. Comment and like. It's always nice to hear what you guys have to say, as long as it's nice. So thank you so much, and yeah, we'll see you next time, and I hope you get inspired. I hope you create, and most importantly, be happy. See you next time. Got to take the weight off. Oh no! The pretty side is this one. Ah, what a waste.